Welcome to the Sourcing Industry Landscape podcast, hosted by Dawn Tura, CEO and President of SIG.
Well, folks, this is Dawn Tura, President and CEO of SIG, and I am so excited to welcome to the studio today Dan Beck. Now, Dan is the COO and co-founder of Utmost, spelled U-T-M-O-S-T. So, Dan, I want to welcome you, and I really want to dig into some of your background.
Oh, great to be here, Dawn. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Utmost, that's not where you started. You've got a long and storied career. I mean, going back to MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management Northwestern, a BA in Civil Engineering from University of California, Berkeley. That does not indicate that you would end up in workforce management, contingent labor, all of this. So tell me a little bit about your journey, if you don't mind. I'd love to know how you got there.
Yeah, well, love to do it. So, and I'm excited to tell you about Utmost today. So my journey, I was going to build skyscrapers and bridges. I studied civil engineering at Berkeley. You know, at the time, is the best seismic engineering school in the world. It's in California country here in San Francisco. And as a side note, I just finished reading 1906, which is a great read about the historical fiction about the earthquake and subsequent fire in San Francisco.
Yes.
Really, really interesting. But then what happened was, in undergrad, this thing called the internet was taking off. And I got my first email address. I had a campus job in the Department of Housing and Dining, like IT support job. And I just got really turned on to technology, and specifically software technology. And so when I graduated from Berkeley, from Cal Berkeley, I went into Anderson Consulting, showing my vintage a little bit, now Accenture, and got a chance to implement large scale back-end systems, ERP systems, do management consulting for some of the world's largest companies and some governments. Actually, I spent a year living in Singapore, implementing a financial system for the Ministry of Finance, the government of Singapore. And so in that endeavor, I learned about, I'd say, not just business and enterprise, first job out of undergrad, but really connected with my interest, my passion in technology. But then I started asking the question, like, I've been putting in these systems, I've been serving individual customers. Who are the individuals? And this was the rise, by the way, of products like SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft. Back in the day, for example, I implemented a PeopleSoft financial system for the Ministry of Finance in Singapore. And I started asking the question, who are the people designing and building these software products? And I learned about the function product management. And so the majority of my career has been in product management, product strategy. And I really made a shift from that point forward. Went to a few startups, went to Intuit, which is a really great, I think, learning ground for the trade of product management. And I never really looked back. Then it was into software companies, building products, being a part of product and engineering efforts. And in that endeavor, the most relevant move I made that brought me to Utmost ultimately was when I joined a little company called Workday, which at the time was focused on human capital management solutions, financial management solutions. Now has added analytics solutions, some robust analytics solutions to what they do. And so that was, I suppose, the fork in the road that really brought me into HR, people, technology, workforce management solutions, and of course, the finance side of it. And so happy to tell you about Workday, but had a 10-year lovely experience at Workday, leading primarily their technology products group. And then had a stint in go-to-market, ultimately focused on their platform extension capabilities, and that's where my co-founder Andre and I got the if you will the seed of the idea to start Utmost, namely that there's just a growing population of workers and firms coming together to get work done, and it's complementary to but different than the traditional HR systems of record out there and financial systems of record out there. And we thought that was a great challenge, a great opportunity to try to tackle that in a way. And I'll have to tell you about our go-to-market strategies, but in a way that we think is complementary to what Workday is doing. And so I guess you could summarize my career as trained to be an engineer, got turned on by tech, did some consulting, found my way into building products, and really never looked back, and now have a chance to build a company in Utmost focused on this really interesting space of non-employee labor. We call it the extended workforce.
So your background is fascinating. And by the way, every company you've ever worked at that you mentioned are members of SIG. So
Ah, very good.
you were
Yes.
meant to be here as a result of
I'm
your.
happy to be here, Don. Yeah, congrats on your success. We really enjoyed your latest event exhibiting there for the first time. We'll definitely be back. So that's good to hear. Good to hear. I'm with good company at some level.
Yes, you are. So Utmost, first, tell me about the name. So it's such a great name to me, and it's one of those things that comes up. It's a perfect word in conversation. But why did you choose that for the name of the company?
Yeah, we had a really funny. I mean, if there's the long version and the short version. I'll give you the kind of shorter version if you have real
Okay.
interest. Over cocktails one day, we'll hit the longer version. But the short version is we were looking for an aspirational name. We started the company with a placeholder name. My co-founder Henri, this is his third venture he started. The
Uh-huh.
first one went public on the Nasdaq. The second one got acquired by Workday. That's how I met him, and
Okay.
this is his third. And so he's Irish. He's based in Dublin, as is our third co-founder, Patty Benson. And so Henri and Patty are in Ireland. And so we wanted a placeholder name. We hadn't yet decided on a name, so we called it Saltese, which is a twin pair of islands off the coast of Ireland, about 2 hours kind of south of Dublin. And so that was our placeholder name for a year. And so we had some time to think through a name that we thought was really going to fit for the company. Now, Utmost, it's a really aspirational name.
Yeah.
We think it leads to sort of future potential. Our strategic theme is get the most from your all. And so this idea that you've got this workforce doing amazing things for you in larger and larger populations, and that is, from our perspective, a huge asset. It's a talent pool. It's an asset. It's the way work is increasingly getting done. And this idea of the most from your all, we started saying that, like, you've got thousands of people working for you and you don't know their name. Isn't that a tragedy, right? And and wouldn't it be great if you could kind of, be your best self, be your utmost, get the most from not just yourself, your team, your employees, but everyone doing work for you. And so if you look at, we have kind of an interesting little video clip I can send to you separately, Dawn, that it has a kind of interesting use of the T's and the utmost to kind of form brackets and sort of reveal things, like revealing this workforce that's doing amazing things for you. So yeah, so thank you. We're really pleased with the name. We do have an homage to the Saltese Island. If you look at some of our swag and our website, we have a little puffin, this migratory bird that lives on the
Oh,
Saltese
yeah.
Islands. And so it's just a little bit of fun. Like, it's enterprise software. We're ISO certified. We're all the right things to sell to the world's largest companies, but we want to have a little bit of fun in our brand as well. So we kept the puffin, if you will, into the utmost name and brand identity.
I'm going to have to go look for him now.
It's fun. Yeah, he's got a name and everything. Yeah, we give
Yeah.
out salt. His name is Salty, so we give out Salty awards for like customer go lives. We had a Fortune 500 customer go live just today, and so we gave out a Salty award to our VP of engineering for all his hard work supporting that go live. But anyway, thank you for that. We think it's a name that also speaks to not just the enterprise that's wanting work to get done, but also to the worker themselves, because it's sort of an uplifting, don't we all want to aspire to something more
Yes.
sublime?
So, so how do you differ from other companies that are in your space today? The
Yeah.
value
So
of
the right. Yeah. No. It's the right question. I mean, when we started the company, uh, some of the genesis of why we started the company was, I would speak to C-level execs that were Workday customers, and they, we'd be asking about roadmap investments and investment themes, and essentially they'd say, "Could you just get me off of SAP Fieldglass?" Like, because we had all these hopes and dreams, door number one, door number two, big investment bets. And that was a real eye opener for me because I just didn't know that much about, contingent labor, right? I thought it was sort of like, isn't this all just, don't we already handle this? And so as we got into it, we started learning about, if you will, the workflows, the functionality, the gaps, the needs, the vast complexity of not just contingent, but service-based contracts, process outsourcing, business process outsourcing, massive rise of freelance talent. So we looked at that, we said, look, this is a crowded market that for some reason, now this is an SIA stat, they would say that there's better part of $3 trillion going towards non-employee labor spend globally. And about 6% of that is captured by the vendor management systems. And so the closest proxy to what we're focused on would be a VMS. But as we looked at the market, we said they must be getting something wrong, because after 21 years in market, that's a pretty poor track record. And then, as we looked at, we said we don't want to be the 37th VMS on the market,
Right.
because that approach is clearly not working. And so we consciously launched the company in October 10th of last year. So we're just past a year past our launch. We're 2 years past incorporating. And our thesis was, it's time for something new. It's fine when 2% of your working population was, say, staff aug brought to you by a staffing firm, contingent worker, the traditional contingent worker. 10 years ago, it was 20%. Today, it's around 43%, according to Ardent Partners and others. I mean, it's a massive, the way, it's not too hard to imagine a growth trajectory where the majority of the working population is a non-employee to the end enterprise employing them. They might be an employee to the firm, right, to the consultancy, to their own little LLC, of course, but like the way work is getting done is just fundamentally changing. And we thought it was time for a new solution to tackle that. All these working populations in a way that's harmonious to your employee population. It shouldn't be this silo over here doing contingent stuff, right? The 6% silo. It's like, why not the whole workforce? So we built a new solution. We see it as a new category, extended workforce system, and a first of its kind. And what's different about it is it's going to handle the multiple populations of how, and the vagaries of how work's getting done. It's going to be deeply connected to your human capital management system of record, because we want to get to the more sublime total workforce thinking, not sort of silos of individual non-employed labor. And lastly, it's going to be worker centric. We think with the rise of freelancers specifically, but just kind of worker agency in general, that it's time for a system that actively considers the worker. So you can, I listened to your, to your podcast, just your most recent with Kevin Paul. It's like, okay, so we're talking about diversity and inclusion. How are you going to get that data, right? A lot of times firms are scared to ask the question. Why not ask the worker to self-report? Give the worker agency over their data. If you look at the T's and C's of our contracts, we carve out worker data is owned by the worker. And that's very novel, very novel. So I would summarize that and say, multiple populations it'll support, total workforce mindset, and lastly, this worker centricity. If you kind of look at the thematically, what's different. But here's the point, Dawn. Here's the point is, and there's a corollary here that I think is really interesting. When I was at Workday, we were pushing for, among other things, cloud, right? So Workday was born in the cloud. I mean, that was a huge sea change at a time, where, very few companies believe you could put core systems of record in the cloud. But, here we are, right? 15 years on from that. And yet the more subtle thing Workday was doing, at least on the HR side. Now, Workday's been HR and finance really from the beginning. But on the HR side, they were moving from essentially tactical systems of record like payroll to strategic workforce systems like human capital management, saying this isn't just about a transaction, paying people. This is about how you want to get work done. It's about how you treat people. This is about your strategic objectives and how you have a people plan to meet that. And we see a corollary here in this space, as the VMS feels very tactical. I'll capture your rate card. I'll track a tenure limit. I'll do basic onboarding, offboarding. I'll generate an invoice. I might do a consolidated invoice, right? Pretty tactical stuff for a pretty small population. We think it's gonna have a chance to go to an extended workforce system, which ultimately will be more strategic. How does this working population factor into my strategic goals? How can I get more done with more resources? How do I flex? What's the blended workforce? And so that's the interesting thing. I mean, I can assure you, Dawn, I can tell you all day about all the great things we're building, but thematically, we're doing something fundamentally different. And I think you'll feel it, and our customers will feel it, is going from a more kind of transactional, kind of specific point in time to something more strategic, something more longitudinal that again is more worker centric.
So, years ago when I was consulting, I remember a CFO came to the CPO one day and said, "How many people does it take to run our company?" And the CPO said, gave him whatever it was, 14,000, the head count. And he said, "No, how many people does it take to run our company?" And he said, 14,000. He said, no, I mean, everybody, all the contingent. And it became, I mean, talk about drinking from the fire hose. They started finding, at the end of the day, it was like 28,000. It was almost double the
Yeah.
number of employees. And that was like
Yeah.
mind blowing to the executives to say, we think of ourselves as a 14,000 person company, but it takes 28,000 people to actually run us. And I think
Yeah.
that recognition now is, I think people are finally getting it that the services side is so huge in so many companies that they have to get their arms around it. So I love your approach. But what's different too, Dan, is that you talk about these contingent workers as real people. Like they've always been treated like the ugly cousin, that nobody wanted to talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
They were never treated the same. And I'm seeing a little bit of a shift that says we have to treat our contingent labor better than we have in the past. They're not just a also and, nice to have. They are absolutely critical to our future, and we want to be able to attract and retain the right contingent labor. So your approach just sounds so much more human than most people when they talk about contingent labor. So I like
Yeah,
that.
we certainly hope so, Don. I like your thinking there. I mean, aren't we all more than a rate card, right?
Right.
Like, don't you have skills and preferences and passions? And wouldn't it be great if you could express that and connect that to work that needs to get done? Um, we think forward-looking organizations are increasingly going to think of their entire workforce in the same way that I'm a huge fan of Workday, as you can imagine. A lot of friends there. Great career boost. Still a shareholder. But we would see, there are still companies in the world today that think of HR as a tactical function, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to a strategic way to run a company, right? And and so we think there's going to be a similar pattern here where forward-looking companies say, wait a second, 20, 30, 40%, possibly more. I mean, in tech, where around here where I live in California, very commonly well over 50% of the working population is non-employees in the extended workforce. And and I think what we're starting to see is, green shoots of tangible reasons that, say, a chief people officer, as well as a CFO, CPO, should really care. And it's starting from, for example, one trend we're seeing is continued workforce programs, increasingly very much a tight partnership between. But that was the other thing I liked about your podcast with Kevin. It's just like, you know, now procurement thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, right? It's like, you know, what a need for partnership between HR and procurement as a general statement, but now even more, right? But increasingly, we're seeing a shift where the ownership point of a contingent workforce program might very well be in HR, leading up through reporting up to, talent acquisition, because there's such a high propensity to hire, right? And or someone in HR saying, look, I'm chief people officer, I'm responsible for the experience across all people, anyone coming to work today for us.
And they
And
never
it's
used to think about that. It was
yeah, and it's
always the
yeah,
life cycle of an employee.
yeah,
Never.
but again, back to the forward-looking companies. I mean, I think forward-looking companies are going to see this as not just how work's getting done. I think that is self-evident at this point, and the stats are there.
Mhm.
But as a way to tap into talent that they cannot hire, right?
Right.
One of the number one reasons, Josh Bersin has a great study out, and this is all pre-COVID. I want to say it was April of last year. Remember in the good old days we could like meet in person. But it was called he's a very well regarded HR analyst, and he said his paper was titled "The Alternative Workforce Not So Alternative Anymore," and he was articulating the reasons that companies use non-employed labor, and one of the number one reasons was skills they can't hire for. you know and around Silicon Valley, certain hot centers, the top companies can hire anyone they want, but a lot of companies in the world, you want to go get the best mobile developer, you're better off with a freelancer or a contingent worker coming in, right?
Right.
Then
Right.
you're not going to be able to hire that person for the vast majority of time. And increasingly, there's a McKinsey Global Institute study out there that talks about 165 million independent workers in the US and the EU alone. Pretty broad definition, independent in that case. But this is the other theme on the rise, which is, you're going to be courting freelance talent in a way like you're courting full-time talent today. They're just going to come do a gig for you for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 3 months, and you'll be mobilizing talent in and out. Even our little company, I mean, we're 2 years into it. Like I said, Dawn, we have threefold. Our if X is our employee count, we're threefold non-employee count. Now, you imagine that for us living into that, but the way I think of it is, you know, those extended workers, they're not working for us all the time consistently. It's talent we're mobilizing as we need it. Some are consistent, right? Some are, you know, helping us a year in tax and audit. Some are doing legal work, external legal counsel. Some are, you know, just, you know, it's a really interesting texture of what's going on there. There is a certain amount of dignity in respecting the worker and the work getting done, and I think forward-looking companies are going to think of this as how work's getting done and embrace it, as opposed to be kind of dragged into it. And yet it's complex. Companies want to stay compliant, right? I mean, I was talking to, and you know, I mean, we've got a broad definition of all the work getting done out there, and this is part of why this business is so fun to run, which is every week. There's not a week that goes by right now, Dawn, that we don't see some new use case, some new scenario of how work's actually getting done with non-employed labor, right? In a way that I never would have expected. So, for example, in a month's time, we've got a fantastic customer going live in healthcare, and they've got 15,000 non-employees. They have 12,000 employees, 15,000 non-employees across every type of care delivery, nursing, physicians. Like, there are babies being delivered today in their delivery rooms that are non-employee physicians, brought to them via their, you know, employees LLC, sometimes a consortia, sometimes the individual physician. And it's mind-boggling, right? Because you show up to this care facility, and you're like, okay, I'm going to this hospital, right? But it's just this rich tapestry of how work's actually getting done. So I think forward-looking companies, it's an opportunity to be more efficient as a business. It's an opportunity to have a bigger seat at the table. It'll be a huge partnership, HR and finance. I had one procurement leader say to me, he said, look, HR is going to own the experience and we will own the processes. And yes. I quite like that. I think that's a nice way to think of it, because, you know, the rigor that, you know, if you will, procurement, finance can bring to this is really required, because you have all kinds of contract vehicles, you've got different liabilities, you've got compliance concerns. And so I do think that partnership between HR and procurement and finance will continue.
But I also, you know, when we first started entertaining, you know, the whole talent topic, this is probably 8 years ago, you know, people started talking about talent. It was like a hot potato or a volleyball. You know, HR would throw it to procurement would throw it back to HR, and nobody wanted to own it. It was like, no, I am about the employee experience. And procurement's like, no, you have to own all these people. And HR is, no, I'm about the employee. And they say, you have to own it. It's all about contracts. And so I like the fact that you see the two coming together and actually co-owning it. One has the experience, the other one has the contractual capabilities, but they have to work together.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And we think of it as, you know, this is not a cost center. This is not just a cram down your supplier's rate card play. This is a strategic asset. This is how work's getting done increasingly. Most companies can tap into new growth possibilities, you know, new growth engines, new markets more rapidly with the extended workforce. And I think as companies have better use cases, better examples of this, it will we'll continue to see that partnership strengthen. And I've seen it as well, Dawn. I had one really colorful chief people officer, and she's like, right, I'm responsible for people and facilities, and I can tell you right now, there are 20,000 people at our facilities, and I have no idea who they are. And so her point was, if HR, really anybody, but whomever, let's just say HR for the moment, is going to be on point for this, then they need better solutions. And that's one reason, you know, that our approach is squarely anchored on having a total workforce view. That's why we're solely selling to Workday customers, so we can get to this, you know, nirvana for some, and see the total working population. Right now, today is what our customers see: employee, non-employee, with all the vagaries of the classification, different categories of how work's getting done around the globe for the world's largest companies. And that's fun, but there need to be better solutions to connect the dots in that picture. Otherwise, yeah, why not have it as a hot potato?
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because my view has shifted. When COVID first hit, and folks, we're recording this originally in October of 2020. So when COVID first hit, all the contingent labor went to zero.
Yep.
Because you were suddenly sending all your employees home. So it just seemed like contingent labor went. It was enough to deal with our employees. We couldn't deal with our contingent. And I thought, wow, I wonder if this is going to mean that the next generation is going to want to be an employee because at least they kept their jobs right away. But now, with the work from home or work from wherever working out so well for so many companies, I almost see an explosion of contingent labor because you really don't have to have them at your facility. You don't have to have them coming into the office. We all realize that things like Zoom and Slack and Teams, we have so many ways of communicating and working with our employees. Do you think maybe the pandemic is going to give a rise to more contingent labor as a result, rather than make people want the security of a job?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly believe so. It's really tied to what you're saying in that you now have the possibility for worldwide access to skills, but
Yeah,
you also have companies that have gone through a shock, and it's not that uncommon for me to have a conversation like this. They say, look, I just furloughed 5,000 employees. I'm going to bring back 500, but I'd like to keep in touch with those other 4,500 in some fashion, right? Because I'm going to have work coming up, maybe things change. And so I think that the need for, we have an increasingly dispersed, um, remote workforce, and there's just a massive need for agility. And we think that's, agility in any one instance can be a little bit harsh, like, oh, I'm laying off an employee, but frequently, that sort of ability to flex up and down a staff via a consultancy, a staffing firm, et cetera, is a huge benefit to an enterprise. And we don't think it needs to be bad for the worker. I mean, the worker having that ability to have two or three clients and move around, right? So I think we're going to see an increase in, yes, I think the global and remote nature of what we're seeing with COVID or coming out of COVID, as well as, candidly, the need for more business agility and speed, I think will result in, you ask a typical CFO, do you want fixed labor costs or variable labor costs, right? Like, bring on the variable labor costs because you
yeah,
never know when things change. And yet, I mean, we have a couple of companies that we're serving. They're large enough where, just I'm just using made up numbers here, Don, but they have 100 divisions. With COVID, 80 are down, but 20 are blowing up because they're in the sanitation business and they're like cleaning stuff and they're creating new products, right? And so it's one of these like house on fire, shutting down one. And so this need for, how do you have more fluid use of labor pools to achieve business objectives? And
yeah,
that is what the extended workforce brings. I think there's another more subtle point to this, kind of coming back to that rise of independence, which is there are some decent studies out there that really blew my mind. One is from NASA recently, where they're talking about the value of letting their employees freelance, like let their employees have a side hustle. And
oh,
it really comes down to skills. And what they're really saying is, bringing in freelancers, bringing in non-employed talent is upping our skills. That's kind of self-evident, like you would think of that historically. But now they're saying when we send our people out or enable them to go have a side hustle, that they're bringing new skills, new know-how, back into the organization. And I was like, man, if what you would certainly traditionally think of a really kind of, I'd say, closely held, possibly even stodgy organization like NASA doing that,
yes,
like that's an amazing statement, right? And so I think this, I've got three young boys here, and I think the probability. I was looking at some Bureau of Labor Statistics data earlier last year, and this is what I do for fun, Dawn, and it was saying that individuals coming out of undergrad right now have 13 different employees or employers they're going to work for on average, 1-3. And that's up from say 6-7 when I came out of undergrad, and like 2 when my parents came out of, or I guess my parents didn't. Anyway, when my parents started working. And so, 13, you got a 30-year career, take it up to 15. It's like 2 years here and there. It's not too hard to imagine, right? That the way work is getting done is increasingly independent. I
Yeah.
mean, I happen to work 10 years at Workday, great window of my career. I worked for 5 at Accenture. I mean, these are lovely windows of time, but like that's not going to be the case for my kids, right? And very likely they'll be doing a side hustle along the way, right? They'll have their own little business or have a little LLC. They'll do their own, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I just think that the texture of work is more complex, more dynamic, but if it brings better skills into your organization and skill growth and learning and fresh ideas, uh, I think there are increasingly some early data points to point to that. Like, yeah, it's going to be better for the enterprise, it's going to be better for the worker. But I mean, this is a long-winded answer to your question, Don. Yes, I think the stats will tick up towards more non-employee labor, perhaps initially economically, just due to the trade-off, the preference for the flexibility and the agility that means from a office of finance. But I do think there will be the right kind of companies will see that as just new channels for skills and talent to come into their org. And then there like that's the carrot, right? There is a stick here, right? Which is, I remember talking to one senior leader, and he said, "Look, 14% of our Glassdoor ratings are from contractors, and they're all quite negative." So back to what you said earlier, this idea of you care about your brand, people want to know what you stand for. If you're only focused on employee population, which is like treating everybody else kind of poorly, like that's going to get out, right? Like that is also not okay. So there is a stick side of this of, doesn't it feel like the right thing to treat people working for you better? In the same way, again, I'm a huge proponent of my third reference. I apologize to your discussion with Kevin. I feel like I need to reach out to that guy. But the idea that, yeah, the idea that look at diversity as not just diverse suppliers, but who's working for you? What does my workforce look like? What's my workforce diversity? And shouldn't my extended workforce, my non-employees, count in there if they're 40% of my working population?
Well, I was talking
We think so, yes.
from California the other day, and he said the best thing about me being able to diversify my workforce and not have them all be Bay Area thinkers, because there
Yep.
is a certain mindset. I'm from there, and there's a certain mindset. He said, but my company is global, and if everyone I hire has a Bay Area mindset, we're not going to have that diversity of thought. And he said, so the more I can diversify and hire these contingent workers to diversify the thoughts that come into our corporation, the better we're going to be able to serve our customers. And so
Yep.
that was, like, wow, you do get into, whether it's New York City that thinks a certain way, Chicago is a certain way, San Francisco is a certain way. But by being able to diversify that workforce, how much more diversity of thought you bring into the company is so rich.
A lot of tech companies know this, where they allow their software engineers to say contribute to open source projects, and it is that diversity of thought, geographically. I mean, diversity is a very broad definition. We benefit as a startup, having our 3 co-founders are based in Europe, based in Dublin, Ireland, and our team in Ireland. 2/3 of our companies in Ireland. The rest primarily in the U.S. But if it's California, it's Florida, it's all over in the U.S., right? And so I think we've benefited from that as well. But yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, it's the other side. I mean, I think I've been a little remiss in saying this. The other side is it's better for the bottom line, right? Like it's a mess out there in the non-employee workspace that we're seeing. I mean, silos of data, inconsistent workflows. Nobody can answer the question. I love your statement earlier. It's like, how many people are working for us? Like, a Workday customer would have a pretty good answer on the employee population, probably a very good answer. Even Workday customers might not have a real clue to their non-employee population. And why is that? Well, because 6% of spend is going through a VMS. The rest is, they're in 100 countries and they've got a VMS in 5, and there's like 2 instances of the VMS. It's like, it's just a mess out there. And so it's a whole data team just trying to stitch this together. And so I think that's the other thing, is that's a lot of, like, that results in a lot of wasted time, wasted processes, terrible hiring manager experience. Our point of view is leveraging an extended workforce shouldn't be as costly as it is. It should be much more efficient, both in terms of time used and better for the worker. Worker doesn't want to sit there and try to onboard and wait a half day to get systems access, right?
Oh, half a
or,
day. No,
yeah,
that's
2 days. Yeah. It's like, that'd be light speed. Yeah. I know. I know. No, that's great. We were talking to a big bank recently, and between the roles, the locations, and the different training requirements, they have just hundreds of permutations of onboarding. And, that's the kind of complexity we crave. But, what they do today is mind-numbingly inefficient, right? So I think I just want to say because we're talking about some pretty sublime topics here, Don, right? Diversity and inclusion, the world of work is going to look in the future. But I guess my fundamental point is that's going to be a more efficient business. My little company is more efficient with the 3x extended workers that we leverage as appropriate versus having all those folks candidly as employees, because they'd be underutilized, right? And that we can tap into across across marketing, across legal counsel, across accountancy and finance, great talent that we don't have to hire full time because we might not have need for them full time. So I think there's a core bottom line side of this, and it's just companies in the future are going to be much more nimble, much I think more narrow cores of employees, and much more adept at tapping into multiple different talent pools to get things done elegantly.
And this has been so fascinating. We are out of time, unfortunately, but I would love. I mean, you were so easy to talk to. One question that I'm going to leave you to ponder, and I'd love to come back and have another podcast with you once you've had a chance to think about it. So I'm a recovering CPA, and
I know. Yeah, I looked at your background. I did love your keynote. It's really nice.
Thank you. But as I look back, I spent years and years and years, talking to companies. I was in the Bay Area, startups, on don't blend, don't treat your contingent workers like employees, or they're going to be deemed employees. And the IRS is huge on that. And California is huge on that. And, we've had lawsuits, we've had settlements, we've had IRS cases. So I would love to invite you back to say, now as we start to treat these contingent workers better, are we going to blur that line where the IRS is going to come after us? And we don't have time to talk about it right now. But that is something that is really churning in the back of my head. I'm getting all these warning bells. So we can't cover that today, but I'd love for you to think about that and come back in another podcast.
Absolutely, Dawn. Hey, what a pleasure being here today with you. We certainly have solutions for that, but I'd love to talk more with you about it when we have more time. And I really enjoyed the chat today.
I enjoyed it. Folks, this is Dan Beck, COO and co-founder at Utmost. Look them up, look him up, get connected with him on LinkedIn and everywhere else. Dan, this has been such a pleasure. So have a wonderful day, and I can't wait to invite you back.
Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Sourcing Industry Landscape podcast through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Want to nominate someone for an interview? Email us at info@sig.org.